Hey, welcome to this Program for Cultural Heritage demo video. We're going to continue in this lecture looking at the Twitter API, and we're going to move on from reading and getting to actually writing or tweeting in this case. So in the previous lecture, when we started, we wanted to kind of sign up for an API key, make an account, get an API key, and start working with the API. And we kind of discovered that there are these newer version 2 endpoints for searching the existing tweets. So in the last video, we went over kind of using Twitter's new V2 endpoints to search for existing tweets that are historical tweets. So we were able to use just the new endpoint and the request module to do that searching, and that was working pretty well. But we didn't get into posting, right? So we can read from Twitter, but we haven't really posted or wrote to Twitter yet. So from looking at the documentation, there's really no V2 endpoints yet for actually tweeting out. Those are still back in the existing kind of older 1.1 endpoints to actually post a tweet. And so in order to do that in this video, we're going to use a module that will let us do that communication with those v1.1 endpoints without having to kind of do very elaborate authentication and OAuth stuff like that. So this module we're going to use is Tweepy, and it's basically a wrapper around the Twitter API for the version 1.1, and then it has methods built into it that you can actually send tweets and stuff like that. So to get started, we are going to just install Tweepy. This is the documentation for it. And so there is, just install. We're just going to do typical as we install any Python module by just doing pip install and the module name. And so we're going to do that. Pip3 install. All right. So that's installed. The next thing we need, we can look at the examples of how to use the library. And so they have some getting started examples here. Basically, they say, import your module. You set these consumer key, consumer secret key, access token, and access token secret, and then you can do stuff with it, right? So we need all four of these pieces of information. We need our consumer keys and our secret keys and tokens and stuff. So we need to go back to our developer portal interface for the website for Twitter. So if we are on the developer or dev.twitter.com, you can go to developer portal. And this has the projects, right, that we've been working on. And if you, we need to do two things. We need to get the keys that we need, and we also need to change the settings. So right now, the API, this project that we've been using, we set up for it, is only set up to do read-only interactions with Twitter. And so that worked fine last time because that we were just reading historical tweets using the V2 endpoints. But now we need to actually post, right? So we need to change this to read and write. So there's actually 3 levels. So if you were going to do maybe some like a Twitter bot later that used DM functionality like direct messaging, you might need to change this. For us, we just want to post to Twitter on our general timeline, so we're just going to use read and write. All right, so now it's changed. The next thing we need to do is go back to our dashboard. We need to get these keys that we're going to use for our project. And so there's 2 sets of keys. There's the consumer API key and secret, and then there's the access token and secret key. And so the first one is this API key and secret. And then the second one is this access token and secret for the other set, the secret keys. So we need all 4 of these to work. So let's go back to let's start coding. And so we're gonna go make a new file. I'm gonna save this in my downloads. I'm just gonna call it t_tweets.py. So the first thing we need to do, of course, is as the documentation said, we need to import the module. So we're just gonna do import Tweepy. And then we need to set up these keys and set them the values. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it. And we just need to go through and change each one of these. And so this kind of gets into the to an area of talking about where you'd want to store these. So um, you probably necessarily, if you wanted to share this code with somebody later, you would not want to hard code this into your Python file, right? Because then they would have your keys and they could tweet as you. So you'd want to have some other way of doing this. And so you could do that in a number of ways. You could save this in an external JSON file and load that file into this script and then load those values. You could use environmental variables. So you could set an environmental variable to hold this data, and then you can invoke a module to load environmental variables in your script. But for us, we're not going to be sharing this code with anybody. So we're just going to hard code this stuff. So we're just going to go through and define each one of these pieces of information by making a new variable for each one that's already kind of defined in an example, and going through and just replacing them with our hard-coded values. All right, so we need the consumer key and consumer secrets. So if we go back to our web, that is here, these API key and API secret. So that's this one, API key. Then the other one is the consumer secret key, is this one. Then after that, we need the access token and access token secret. So let's look at that. So these are down here. So you might need to regenerate if you have already generated, that's fine. So this is the access token. And then the next one is the access token secret. All right, so we have all those set up, and we could just run the script just to see if it works, right? Because we don't want it to there might be some problems that we with the library or with something how we're invoking it. We just want to make sure this works before we get too far into it. So let's just try running it. So I'm just gonna do Python 3 t tweet. All right, so it didn't error out. We know the module's installed correctly, it loaded correctly, it maybe even authenticated correctly. It just didn't do anything yet, right? So if we go back to the web documentation for Tweepy, the module, we can see that in their example, they set up this, they authenticate, and then they kind of loop through the public tweets in the person's timeline. So we want to actually tweet. We don't want to loop through our own tweets. We actually want to publish something. So let's go to the API reference, and so right, so we need to figure out how to, the API. This is basically just a wrapper around the existing API, and the API has endpoints, but the Tweepy module implements them in some way, a different way, right? So we just need to figure out how Tweepy implements those APIs. And so there's various things that kind of are very self-descriptive: user timeline, retweets of me, returns the 20 most recent tweets of authenticated user that have been retweeted by others. Mentions, returns the 20 most recent mentions. Okay, status method. Returns the status of somebody, update status. Updates the authenticating user's current status, so that would be us with our keys, also known as tweeting, right? So that's what we want to do. We actually want to tweet. And so basically you say API dot status update and then the status, and then there's all these options you could pass to say like reply to somebody else, exclude user IDs, add media information to it, add location information. But let's just try to do the basic stuff where we're just going to tweet from us. So we need this API method somehow, and then update status. So I'll copy that update status. And if we look at this getting started, so basically after they authenticate, they make this API method or object ready to go to do these things like update status and other stuff. So we probably need to do this part first, because the documentation said use like API.update status and then what you wanted to tweet. So let's go back to our code. And so we know we're going to update status at some point, and then we know we want to actually invoke the API, get it ready. So I think this part sets up the authentication and then passes it through the Tweetbee API to talk to Twitter to actually authenticate, and then it returns like this thing that can communicate authenticated with Twitter. So we're going to go back and do that step too before we update status. And so now we have an API variable that has these things built in like update status, or should. So I'm going to do test. All right, so hopefully this goes through each step and it updates, it authenticates, and then it updates our status, basically tweeting. So save it, and let's see if it gets any error messages when we run it. All right, so no messages or response at all. So hopefully if we go to our Twitter page, our home, our actual Twitter account that we created in the last lecture, we would see, oh, there we are, right? So in our profile, we have a tweet tweeted, right? So very straightforward. You just need those keys set up, and then you can use the update status. So depending on what you want to do, more advanced stuff, right? You could potentially want to, attach an image to this, right? So add an image to your post, add a video to your post, add a location to your post, all those things. And so to figure out how to do that, you would want to go into the documentation, right? And then the API reference, and then just figure out how to do that specific thing, right? So let's look at this. All right, so say for example you wanted to add a lat and long. Latitude location of this tweet refers to this parameter will be ignored unless it is inside the range of 90 to 90 plus. North is positive. It would also be ignored if there is no corresponding long parameter. All right, so this tells you that it's supposed to be a value that you can pass the lat and long to. This parameter will be ignored if outside that range, if it is not a number, if geo enabled is disabled, or if there is no corresponding lat parameter. So I don't know what geo enabled is. That's interesting. It might be that like a setting on the account is geo enabled or disabled. So yeah, we could try it. Let's try to see if we can get it to post a location. So I might need to go into my like settings on my Twitter account here to see if I have like geolocation enabled. All right, so add location information to your tweets. So I think maybe this might need to be enabled, so I'm just going to enable it for our example. So this will add locations to our tweets. That was under privacy and settings, and then your tweets, and then add location information. All right, so let's see if that works. If we try to do these other parameters, just an example, right? Because there's a lot of other things you can do to add to these parameters, like adding media and stuff like that. But we just want to try to see if we can get one of these other things working, like lat and long. So you notice these are the variable names, or these are the parameter name that you need to pass to it. So in your actual code, you put a comma and say, okay, lat equals this, and long equals this, right? And so we need to get a lat and long to actually post. So what we could do, we could just go to Google Maps or something and get a lat and long to work with. Let's get one from Let's get one from, I don't know, maybe the middle of the middle of Lake Erie. One of these little islands here. Pelee Island, all right. So I'm going to say what's here, and then it's going to give me this lat and long information at the bottom. So I have this lat number and long number. So it said it had to be within 90, plus and minus 90, so they must have a specific range that you're allowed to be in. So I'm assuming this is the lat and the other one's long, otherwise maybe other way around. But we're just going to paste those values into the lat, and then the other value that I had into the long. All right, so it's passing these two as kind of like floats. So let's see if it works. Test with location. All right, so let's run it. All right, so no feedback, right? And it might be interesting to look at the kind of what that update set as returns, right? Because it could maybe return some information about if it was successful or if it errored out. But let's just see if we have a new tweet on our timeline with location displayed. Yeah. All right, so we tweeted from Pelee, Ontario, which is where that little island was apparently. So yeah, that worked. Cool. So, it's just kind of reading the documentation and what they expect and then providing that information. So, the other things you might want to include would be like an image. So you just need to read the documentation and like how do you hook up an image to this tweet. There's probably an example of how to doing that, but this is kind of basically how you would get started producing tweets. And depending on what you want to do with this, right? If you're making a Twitter bot that like it might be multifaceted, right? So like maybe you're using the V2 endpoints to like search for a certain keyword, and then you're using your bot to like create a new tweet and post and reply to that tweet, right? So you would want to use one of these other kind of possibilities where it's like where you might be like in reply to status ID. So you would probably be like replying to an existing tweet that was already there. So it's really, you need to figure out what you want to do with your posting, and then figure out how to do that with Tweetbee API. So I think that brings end to this basic kind of like just getting Tweetbee working and posting. The next thing that we'll probably look at is actually getting some sort of Twitter bot up and running.